Parents told my brother that he could take my house, and I could just live in the camper in the back yard because I'm single and he has a wife and kids. I'm a single man in my early 30s. I've got a brother who's 29, and he's already got 4 kids now. He had his first at 22, and the second followed a year later. Then the third came 2 years after that. And the fourth was born most recently, a couple of months ago. His wife, my S-ill, and I do not get along. She always tries to get a rise out of me by acting superior. Then, if I retaliate in any way, she turns into an extreme self-victimizing drama queen. She can cry in an instant and put on an extremely convincing show to get sympathy from just about anyone. My parents and brother absolutely adore her, even though they know exactly how she really is and just don't care. She's very good looking, I'll give her that. But she's so awful that I could never be attracted to her. She also refuses to get any sort of job, even though she has a college degree, and my mother willingly helps with the kids all day, so their finances are entirely dependent on my brother. This also means they can't afford to live anywhere but my parents' house. Privacy is a bit of an issue with all of them, under one roof in a 3-bedroom house. Built in the 60s, growing up, my younger brother was also the obvious favorite. We're 3 years apart. But he developed a superiority complex, because I was badly punished if I retaliated against his antics in any way back then. It was obvious my parents cared for him more because he got the lion's share of everything, unless people called them out on it, which did happen fairly often by other family members. That's why my parents packed us all up and moved about. On 50 miles away, after that, they generally only saw us on holidays since it was a 3-hour drive. My brother got physically abusive toward me on a number of occasions. He flirted relentlessly with my first girlfriend to the point that she broke up with me. He laughed at any misfortune I had, and my parents just told me to suck it up whenever I was upset about it. I only got equal treatment when my parents wanted to keep up appearances. I admit it was rather funny to see the looks on their faces whenever they had to treat me equally to my brother on birthdays and Christmas because other people were present. We had relatives who were very nosy and loved gossiping drama, so my parents did their best to hide what was really going on. They even threatened to take all my stuff away if I didn't keep my mouth shut. If anything, it just made my parents celebrate more when I turned 18 and moved out because it meant they no longer had to provide for me. I wasn't even done with high school yet when I moved out, but couch surfing was far better than living with them. I went low contact ever since leaving home. They didn't even show up for my high school graduation, but I really didn't care. From that point on, I would usually only see my parents and brother on holidays. Like the rest of the family, the start of the 2020 pandemic was not kind to me. I lost my job and couldn't renew the lease on my condo, because my roommate also lost his job, and neither of us could afford the place on unemployment money. It was a rented 2-bedroom condo that I really loved. As the lease was ending, my roommate left early to move back in with relatives, and I had to sell nearly all of my stuff, because I was going to be homeless if I didn't downsize to an extreme. I really shouldn't have rented a place that was so expensive, but I liked living the high life until that life wasn't kind to me. I realized I should have been living somewhere far cheaper to save more money for backup, but I had a plan. I own a truck simply because I've always loved trucks, so I found a $1,000 camper in good shape and put it on my truck, just to live out of it for a while. It was supposed to be temporary, but I ended up living out of it far longer than I ever thought. I originally hoped to live out of the camper at my parents' house, where my brother and his family still reside. But when I asked my parents to let me stay for a while, they said the house was full and didn't want me there. Plus, we hadn't exactly gotten along in the past decade. They said they'd only agree to let me park my camper there if I paid basically what it would cost to rent an apartment in my area. That was way too much just to park my camper. I was jobless and trying to save as much unemployment money as I could until I could find a new job. I may as well have been living in an apartment with that rent price. My parents called my camper an eyesore and told me to take a hike since we couldn't come to an agreement. Sil thought it was absolutely hilarious that I had to live in a camper. My brother joined her in pointing at and mocking me while calling me a homeless bum. I parked my truck and camper in a store parking lot to sleep on the first night I had nowhere else to go. I felt scared out of my mind that someone might try to break in. Suffice to say, I didn't sleep well that night. There was nowhere else I could go, as any other relatives who owned houses were fairly far away, and all my friends lived in apartments. I was pretty attached to my area as well, so I didn't want to leave. I had also had my mail forwarded to a friend's apartment. It was the only way I could still get my mail. Finding a stable place to park was pretty difficult. I went looking around to try to find a job similar to my old one. It took months of living the nomadic camper life. During that time, I had to deal with a lot. Everything from beggars and drug addicts to people demanding I leave, because my camper was an eyesore. At one point, someone claiming to be with an HOA told me to move. I wasn't even parked on a street with houses. When I questioned what HOA, they got incredibly belligerent and threatened me. I moved my camper anyway to avoid trouble. To have a steady supply of electricity, I learned to use a long extension cord to plug in anywhere I could to recharge my camper batteries. This meant sneaking around and plugging into outside outlets of random buildings while parked on the street. I know that's a crumby thing to do, but I had to keep my batteries charged so my refrigerator would stay cold. I had a small solar power bank for recharging my phone, but no generator. Generators are noisy and require fuel anyway, so I did what I had to do. After months of living like that, I finally managed to get a new job. I had to move to a neighboring city to find a job that didn't involve retail. I had worked retail in college and promised myself never again, though I was nearly ready to break that promise. I was still getting unemployment money, but I had no stable place to live while receiving it. I didn't want to be jobless when it ran out. Plus, I was bored out of my mind. I had little else to do but read, watch movies on a small portable DVD player, use my phone or laptop, and keep track of where I could park and what public bathrooms I could use. I kind of envy that the Japanese have public bathhouses. We could really use stuff like that over here. When I finally landed a new job, I practically lived in the back lot of the building by the warehouse, in old employee parking spaces that no one else seemed to use. My boss and the company owner liked this arrangement, because I was available to take any shift I could get, as long as I had enough sleep. He even let me take the camper off my truck and set it up in one of the spaces, so I could drive around without it. Not exactly sure if this was legal, but no one bothered us. The entire time I lived back there, I didn't have to deal with many trespassers. There were a few, but the security guards escorted them out. I was pretty much on call almost all the time, working virtually every day of the week. My boss let me plug my camper into the building for power and water, and I paid a small amount of rent by working for free on Sundays, when no one else was in the office but the janitor and security guard. Beyond that, I usually had to shower at a friend's apartment or at my local gym, as the camper didn't have a shower and only a portable toilet. I didn't want to fill it because emptying it is a nasty chore, so I used other bathrooms as often as I could. I had a key to the warehouse and could go in to use the bathroom at any hour. I was even on a first-name basis with the night security guard, who has since become one of my closest friends. The camper was easy to heat in winter with a small electric heater. Summers were not fun. The camper had no AC, so I had to get a used portable air conditioner just to make it bearable. I made a lot of overtime pay and learned some new hands-on skills from other employees. Eventually, midway through the year, I landed a better position in the company as a supervisor and started making a better salary than my old job. That's when I decided I wanted a house. The scare I'd gotten from losing my condo made me realize I needed something much more stable for the long term. I looked around for something close to my work and found a 3-bedroom, manufactured home on a small property, just 2 miles away. I somehow managed to get it for $10K less than the asking price. I used nearly my entire savings for a down payment and got approved for a home loan. I finally didn't have to live in a camper anymore. There was enough space for me to back my truck in behind the house and set up the camper in the backyard. I put it there as its own little building, just in case I wanted to use it again. When I was fully settled in the house, I was dumb enough to brag about it on my book of faces. My family saw the post, and that's where this mess really started. After a few weeks, my parents and brother, along with his family, came to visit completely unannounced to tour my home. I hadn't even given them my address. How they found out where I live, I still don't know. None of my friends have fessed up, and no prior family members had visited me before that. I wondered if they stalked me at work and followed me home. It wouldn't have surprised me. Once I opened the door, they practically shoved their way in like rambunctious tourists and started making themselves at home. They kept poking around, and SEL had this creepy smirk she repeatedly flashed at me. Only later did I figure out why. It made me madder than a bull on steroids just stung by a hornet. My parents constantly commented about how I had so much extra space now, and that it was too much for someone like me who has no wife or kids. Sure, not now, but maybe someday. My brother kept remarking that there was more space than our parents' house, and that my house was closer to his job. Red flags all around, I know. Eventually, my brother asked me to speak privately. Everyone else suddenly left the room and piled out onto the front porch. That's when I realized they had planned something. My brother, let's call him Dan for simplicity, said the house was too much for me alone. He said I should let him move in with his family, because his wife was pregnant with their 4th child, and my house was closer to his job. He pointed out that I already had the camper, so I could just live in that outside while they lived in the main house. I should also point out that Dan never once mentioned paying rent. Mind you, he's got a good job. He started talking about how there would be changes, even curfews, and that I couldn't just walk in at any time without prior notice. If it weren't my brother, I'd think the person I was talking to had lost their mind. But Dan lost his marbles long ago, thanks to our parents treating him like he was the center of the world. I tried to speak, but he kept talking over me as if I had no say in the matter. There was no way in hell I'd rent my house or parts of it to him. Other people maybe, just so I could pay the mortgage off more easily. But certainly not him or his nasty wife. I've seen this exact kind of situation in videos online many times and never thought I'd actually live it. But my parents, brother, and SIL fit the bill for a bunch of narcissistic, entitled crazies. So I picked up my phone and set it to start recording, then just held on to it. Dan didn't even notice, and he kept waving his arms while talking about all the reasons he needed my house. Then he acted like it was a done deal and tried to reach out his hand to shake mine. That's when I finally showed my backbone and said, "Hell no!" I said it loud enough that Dan stumbled backward for a second. I'd rarely ever raised my voice to him like that because our parents punished me when I did. But this was my house, not theirs. My spine could shine as much as it wanted here. I stood up and told him my house was not up for grabs. Acting like I'd let him move in just because they wanted it wouldn't make it happen. I bought my house for me. It wasn't my fault he keeps having more kids and has to live with our parents, because he can't afford to move out. Dan got as physically close to me as he could, without touching me, and said I didn't deserve the house, and that he needed a better place for his family to live. I laughed back in his face and said that was total bullshit. I worked hard to buy my house, and of course I deserved it. Dan started yelling that I have no wife or kids and don't need all the space, so I may as well give it to him. I said I'm not giving him anything, and he never even offered to pay rent. If I let him move in, I'd still be covering the entire mortgage on my own house, without even being able to live in it. Then Dan said he shouldn't have to pay rent because his family comes first, and our parents said I was going to do this and that I will. I yelled, as if their word was law or something, and told Dan they did not have the right or power to give my house to him. Right then, my parents and Sil barged back in through the front door and surrounded me to try to force me to agree. There was a lot of fighting. From this point on, I heard the line, "Just do it for Dan," more times than I can remember. I told them all that they don't have a say in my life or my house and to get out before I called the cops. Sil screamed the loudest, saying she was pregnant again and I couldn't do this to her. I told her I did nothing to her. She just assumed she could take from me because I would allow it. I had no obligation to her or her family. I called her a stuck-up bitch who never had any respect for me. I had no sympathy for her. She wouldn't be living in my house! Well, that made her angry enough to attack me. She got in one good hit on my face and tried to do more, but my brother held her back while she kicked and screamed. She kept demanding he let her go so she could scratch my eyes out. The phone I was holding recorded pretty much everything. I held it up and said I was going to call the police if they didn't leave immediately. My parents told Dan they were leaving. Then my mother said I had a week to come to my senses. I told her I wouldn't and to not come back. Then I told Sil my phone recorded everything. And if she tries anything, I'll press charges for assault. She screamed and stormed out, loudly crying with her face in her hands. My mother was the last one out the door and said, I better do this for Dan and Sil. I told her I wouldn't. TLDR, my family raised my younger brother as the golden child, so I made my own way in life. Then I lost everything, and they wouldn't help me when I needed them most. I ended up living in a camper for years until I got back on my feet and bought a house after hardcore saving. Now my parents want my house so my brother and his family can live there, and want me to live in the camper in the backyard. My brother acted like it was a done deal because our parents said so. I kicked them all out,